Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Yensi, and I'm Yensi Flores Bueso. I'm a member of the executive committee of the GYA, and I was a member of the steering board of the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment last year. And I'm here, and I thank you and welcome you to this event. Where we will be having an enriching conversation about how can we make our research assessment systems can be made more, it can incentivize a socially responsible research culture. So I want to thank you for joining here and forming part of this conversation. And I want to thank my colleagues and co-organizers of this event from ALLEA, Matthias and Bobby, my colleagues from GYA Scientific Excellence Working Group, Carlo and Aram, Stephanie and Natasha from the Open Science Working Group, and Mohammed from the Trust in Science Working Group. I want to also thank Luciana and Karen from the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment who helped us organize this event. And with this, I welcome you and start officially this event. So without further ado, we shall get started in this event, which will consist in 1 hour of talks by the panelists and 1 hour of interactive discussion with the audience. This is a hybrid meeting, so there are many participants in Zoom. So to help with this, we will be taking questions from the audience. I will be here helping with the microphone and taking it from you. But for the audience online, we want to ask you that you please ask your questions in a Slido, and we will share the code for that Slido in a minute. And with that said, I want to introduce my amazing colleague from the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment and GYA member, Luciana Balboa, who will be moderating this event. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I'm really delighted to be co-hosting this event alongside with Yensi. As Yensi said, well, I'm Luciana Balboa. I am a member of the National Academy. I work in infection diseases in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I serve on the steering board of CoARA, a global coalition for advancing research assessment. I will not elaborate in deep on the CoARA initiative because we will soon hear about CoARA from one of our keynote speakers, which is a Karen Stroobants. So please stay tuned for that. But I would like to point out that the growth of CoARA and other initiatives that aims to promote reforms in research assessments really demonstrate that the call for change in assessment practices is transitioning from mere rhetoric to concrete shift in institutional policies worldwide. So we all, or at least most of us, agree that research assessment really needs a change. However, the implementation of such changes introduces new challenges, and those challenges stems from diverse contexts, from economic limitations in various countries, instances of interdisciplinary research, and more. So there are several new challenges associated with implementations attempts. So today we aim to delve into this complexity and explore potential solutions to foster an open and socially responsive research culture. So we would like to make, as Yensi said, this session as interactive, as engaging as possible, because each of us really play a role in research assessment. So whether we are researchers or stakeholders, it's likely we all have been involved in evaluation at some point, evaluating others or being evaluated, or perhaps both. So to begin with, I will pose a thought-provoking question to you in order to find out which criteria we perceive to be most valued in our evaluation, in our current evaluation system. So the question is quite simple. So I would like you to take a moment to think of what criteria are most notably appreciated in current research assessment practices. And for that, I will ask you to take a look at your screen, and you will see that there is a QR code. So you can scan this QR code, and this will direct you to the question and various options. You can select multiple options and then rank them according to their significance. So for instance, if you choose 3 options, you should place first the criterion that you consider most appreciated by the current evaluation system, and the same with the other 2. So please take a moment to scan the QR code and participate in the quiz. You will have only 30 seconds to make the selections. So stay focused and please make your choice quickly. So we will wait about 30 seconds, more or less. And some results are coming. We will have 10 more seconds. Okay. So the question that we are trying to answer is, which criteria are most notably appreciated in current research assessment practices? Okay, so the voting is closed. And these are final results, isn't it? Yeah, okay. So let's see the voting. And okay, so based on the results, it's appeared that the majority favors a quantity of research outputs metrics and funding as top criteria, while a smaller percentage select quality of research outputs, awards, novelty, and collaboration. So now let's move to the second question, which is which criteria would foster good research? So the next question is, which criteria would foster good research? So in this case, it doesn't matter how you had been evaluated, but the question is around what factors you think should be considered to foster good research, whatever good research means to you. So once again, scan the QR code and you will have, again, 30 seconds to make your choice. The same options will be available. And remember that you can choose multiple criteria. Okay. So we will have 30 seconds. 30 seconds are running. Okay, I don't think. Yeah, more votes are coming. The last 10 seconds. Okay, again, now voting is closed. And now let's analyze the outcome that we have after the second round of voting. So in that case, remember, we talked about which criteria would foster good research. So in this case, first, what we can easily see is that in the second question, top criteria is no longer the quantity metrics, the quantity of research output. So a new different criteria has emerged as most prominent. And also societal impact emerged as very prominent, which we didn't see in the previous question. I'm not sure I can go back to the, can we go back to the, okay, to the previous? So if you compare with the result, oh, it's too complicated. Sorry for that. Well, if I remember well, societal impact didn't even appear in the previous question, in the previous answers. So it means that there are a lot of criteria that the current systems don't even take it into consideration, but we do consider them as important, as influential to foster good research. So that led me to a very important question. So if certain factors that are currently neglected or overlooked by current evaluation systems are acknowledged as significant for fostering good research, why are those factors, why are not being considered in our research assessment? So this is a key question. So why? What are the reasons behind the overlooked of those competencies? And secondly, if you see also, there is like a greater variety in the responses when you analyze the responses of the second result. It seems that more criteria were included as significant, more options were like selected. So it seems that if we can ensure a more diverse range of profile of researchers, it seems that we associate it with the fact that we can foster a good research. So these are things that I think that we should take them into consideration for the workshop for the session. And I think that these results can help us to compare which criteria are used to evaluate the work of researchers and which we consider valuable for promoting good research, and whether they are aligned or not. So to complement this quick analysis, I will share with you the figures of the work. I need to go. Okay, we should wait a little bit, sorry. Okay, so just to complement this very, very quick analysis, I would like to share with you a figure from a work of nearly 30 GYM members, in which we analyze the researcher promotion policies of close to 200 regulations across 55 countries. And basically, what we observed is that most of the policies were focused on the evaluation of quantitative outputs. So leaving mentoring, funding, awards, as well as other criteria not evaluated at all. So that questions, so all these results also lead us to another important question. So what kind of research culture are we encouraging when we promote this kind of evaluation? And we anticipate that the speakers that we have today will help us, and we provide invaluable insights to really navigate these complex issues. And that's why I will really start introducing our first speaker for today, and to really start to deep inside this question and try to find clear answers to that. So the first speaker for today is Brian Nosek. So Brian is the executive director of the Center for Open Science and professor at the University of Virginia. He co-founded 3 nonprofit organizations. So one of them is Project Implicit to advance research and education about implicit bias. The second is the Society for Improvement of Psychological Science to improve the research culture in his home discipline. And the already mentioned Center for Open Science to improve rigor, transparency, integrity, and reproducibility across research disciplines. His research and applied interests are to understand why people and systems produce behaviors that are contrary to intentions and values. Also to develop, implement, and evaluate solutions to align practices with values and to improve research credibility and culture to accelerate progress. So today, Dr. Nosek will delve into discussions surrounding research culture, ethics, integrity, and the impact of research assessment. So thank you, Dr. Nosek. We are all ears for you.
Thank you very much to the organizers for putting together this important event, and thanks for coming. I want you to think about why did you get into science? Your origin story might be similar to mine. When I was a teenager, I was inspired by the evidence that I could spend up to 40% of my time in administrative work applying for grants. I was enthralled by trying to figure out how I could publish my work in high impact factor journals, and I spent a lot of my time thinking about how is it that I can get the biggest H index I possibly can get. So that's why I want to go into science. Right? It is laughable because it's absurd, right? It is absurd that we would prioritize these things, that anybody that's a teenager learning about science would say, that's what I want to do when I get into science. But of course, we've set up a reward system where once you are in science, that's what you have to do. That's what you have to think about. When I got into graduate school and discovered that my more senior colleagues didn't spend their time saying, I just want to be curious. I just want to work on the problems that I'm inspired by. I want to sort of wrestle with this. I want to debate with my friends and colleagues about what this evidence means and how we might think about it differently, and what the possibilities are that we could start to seek. Of course, that did come up. What was also there was, oh my God, I got to get this next paper out. And, oh my God, I have to apply for that next grant. And, oh my God, how am I going to get a postdoc? Because those were the concrete things that we face in the everyday work of trying to live as a scientist because of the way the reward system is set up. So what is the fundamental challenge? The fundamental challenge is that the values that we have, the reasons that we are in science, are not the basis of how we are assessed and rewarded. And so we put ourselves into a circumstance where what we want to be doing and how we think we would advance science most effectively is not how we've structured the system of science to encourage and advance our careers. So that's what we need to fix. Now, the challenge, of course, is that that's not an easy fix. The advantage of the current reward system, counting papers, high impact factor, H index, grant dollars, they are concrete, they're easy to count, and they're generalizable. Across fields, you know how to count those things. An administrator can look at it and say, oh, I know what this means because I see it in many different areas. It's concrete because we know when it's been done. It's published or not. It's in that journal or it's not. I have the money or I do not. So the concreteness of those rewards makes them very attractive for cognitive misers, which we all are, which is we don't have the time to really think deeply about everybody's work. We don't have the energy. We don't apply all of the effort to understand what really is meaningful and valuable about the scholarship. And so the simplicity of those concrete, actionable reward structures that currently exist are very hard to overcome. And any change strategy that we have for research assessment has to wrestle with the fact that they are easy, and they're going to be easier than the things that we know are essential for research assessment. So how do we build and structure systems so that the hard parts still rise to the top and don't oversimplify what the actual evaluation context is? The second challenge is that science, of course, is highly decentralized. We have different elements of our reward system. Each journal has its own policies for how it decides what to publish. Getting published is a key part of reward. Each funder has its systems for who gets the funding. Those play big roles in how people are rewarded. And every institution has its own way of thinking about who gets a job and who gets to keep their job. And if we can't change all of those parts of the system, then the pressures of the easy evaluations will always be there as pulling us back into more dysfunctional ways of thinking about evaluation. And so part of that challenge is, how do we address the collective action problem? The fact that no one can be a sole mover. We all have to move in concert. And CoARA, as one example, is trying to solve that problem. And the second is that the fact that many of these are not organized around how scholarly norms actually develop. So within an institution, any institutional policy has to represent the chemists and the poets and the political scientists and the business school researchers. And each of them have norms about what good scholarship is that comes from within their area of scholarship, not from how an institution is organized. And so it's very hard for any institutional policy to itself affect social change, because each of those disciplinary communities are the ones that really govern what the actual values for what good scholarship is when you're doing biological research, when you're doing psychological research. So we have to have a combination of policy changes at institutional funder journal levels, but supported by the normative work, which is the hard work of building up engagement in communities. And so the work of GYA and many other groups like it is the fundamental work of how do we build community around the values that we have, and how do we translate those values into actual measurable, actionable practices to compete against those easy systems that already exist. So thanks for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Brian, so much. And thank you for sticking to the time. Now we will move to our second speaker, which is Ismael Rafols. Ismael leads the UNESCO Chair on Diversity and Inclusion in Global Science at Leiden University Center for Science Technology Studies in the Netherlands. He works in evaluation and science policy with approaches aimed at fostering epistemic pluralism, broadening participation, and widening the distribution of the benefits from science. Dr. Rafols has been involved in policy initiatives related to responsible research assessments, such as the implementation of the UNESCO Open Science recommendation, and in discussions on bias against research topics from the Global South in assessment and databases. Dr. Rafols will provide insights into implications of research evaluation reforms for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Dr. Rafols.
Well, thanks for the invitation. A pleasure being here. Well, being this the global young economy, we'll try to make some points about the global distribution of science. Actually, the inequalities in science. And the 3 points I would like to make is, first, to put on the table that the global research system is extremely unequal. And since evaluation is about the distribution of resources and prestige, evaluation is playing a part in this inequality. The second is that reform in research assessment is focusing on pluralizing the practices, meaning not valuing only publications, but valuing also public engagement, curation of data, outreach to schools. And in principle, this is going to be positive. I got, it's okay, thanks. And in principle, this is going to be positive for inequality, right? Because it will reach out to broader audiences. But in terms of the global inequality, focusing only on the activities is insufficient. And already in CoARA, in the Coalition for Advancing Research in Europe, Assessment in Europe, that also calls for more diversity in representation, but much less that in activities. And there are not so many calls about the importance of diversifying the topics as well. And so the third point is that we really need to think in terms of reforming research assessment of which topics and which populations are being assessed. And I'm afraid that this will mean going beyond the criteria on how researchers are assessed. My proposal is this will require a more fundamental change of how we think of science engages with the world. And I will make a proposal that we should have at least extended peer review, and we should as well think of a more diverse variety of programs. So each of the points, the first point, the research system is very unequal. I'm not going to put data here, but we know that research is highly concentrated in the rich countries, and recently also in BRICS, but most of Africa and most of Southeast Asia still represent a tiny percentage of the research. There is lower participation by females, but some ethnic groups and by rural communities. Non-English is very underrepresented. And research evaluation is one of the drivers in this inequality, because by focusing in publishing versus public engagement, theory rather than field work, rather than experiments or field work, and certain topics is neglecting issues that are relevant for global health. So Luciana is working on tuberculosis, for example, malaria, and lots of neglected diseases, women's health. We know of diseases that are specific of women and are very under-researched, but also cardiovascular treatments for women or are under-research. And in general, also the case of having less clinical studies on African and Asian populations. Now, the reforms on research assessment are suggesting that we move from the figure A, in which we're focusing only on publications or citations, and we include this variety of activities. And this is indeed like a community engagement, mentoring, science communication, collaboration. Now, this is indeed going to be a step forward in pluralizing research, but the challenge I want to throw to the audience, and being this a global young academy, I would say, you know, I work in science policy, and I'm afraid we all guys are out of ideas and rather tired. And I don't see much action going on. So please come up with great ideas and challenge these old scientific institutions and bring about new ideas about how to organize, not just coming out with a few new criteria. This is what's happening in places like CoARA, where the big professors are representing. I think we need to rethink research assessment from scratch. Why is that? Because in terms of valuing how underrepresented communities can contribute to science, and in terms of valuing the knowledge that is necessary for understudied topics, such as tuberculosis, endometriosis, and so on, research has to be brought closer to the communities that benefits. And for this, the proposal is that we cannot keep working with the traditional research assessment. We need to come up with new ideas about how to do research assessment. What type of ideas? I think there are already a number of experiments in place that tell us what could be good developments. To make it shorter, it's focus less on the supply side and more on the demand side of science. Listen to the needs, listen to the populations that might benefit, and the researchers who are closer to those populations. And transdisciplinary programs already in existing organizations, NIH programs on transdisciplinary research on tobacco, for example, are already doing experiments on why, where, and for whom research is conducted. And following on those experiments might be an interesting way forward, as well as experiments of bringing societal stakeholders on board with extended peer review. So there is a lot, I think, to be. There is a lot of space yet for new ways of thinking research assessment in these different contexts for the understudied issues that are so important in this period of world convulsions in so many aspects, climate change, conflict, and different type of research assessment could bring to us knowledge that is useful to our period. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ismael. So for today, we will have two of our speakers that will join us virtually. So one of them is Laura Rovelli, who is our next speaker. I hope, Laura, you can hear us properly.
I can hear you properly. Thank you.
Okay, now we can see you. So I will introduce Laura now. Laura is a political scientist with a PhD in social science, researcher at the National Council for Scientific and Technical Research, CONICET, and professor at the National University of La Plata in Argentina. She coordinates the Latin American Forum for Scientific Evaluation, FOLEC, at the Latin American Council of Social Science, CLACSO, and since 2022 is a member of the executive board of the San Francisco Declaration of Research Evaluation, DORA. Dr. Rovelli will elaborate on the perspective emerging from the Global South, focusing on social demands and their influence on early career researchers. So, well, Laura, welcome, and we are all ears for you.
Thank you very much, Luciana. From the Latin American Council of Social Sciences, it is a pleasure, and we are very grateful for this invitation to participate in this event organized by the Global Young Academy, all European academies, and the CoARA initiative. And thank you also for the inspiring previous speeches. So I will ask you to move forward in the slide. Thank you. So first of all, focusing on Latin American scientific and academic ecosystems, there are many potentialities to be noticed in relation with open culture and engagement with society. There is a strong tradition of knowledge understood as public good, managed by academics with a non-profit vision of open access, and without APCs or outsourcing to commercial publishers. 25% of global open access is published in our region. So there are plenty of university open access journal platforms. Some of the main ones are Latindex, Redalic, and Cielo. So there is a wide range of bibliodiversity and multilingualism. And there are around 12 national nodes of national repositories that are grouped under La Referencia, which is the network of national repositories. And 3 countries have adopted in the last 2 decades open access and national repository laws, and 2 of them, Chile and Colombia, had agreed with an open science policy. in the last years. So there are pioneer regulations in some countries regarding open access, and there are ongoing implementation and recognition of open science indicators in research assessment. Some of the main obstacles are that there is a wide range or wide use of restrictive research information from mainstream sources in most of the research evaluation systems in our region that tend to make less visible the science produced in Latin America. And following the Barcelona Declaration that CLACSO recently signed, decisions are routinely made based on information that is biased against less privileged languages, geographical regions, and research agendas. So that's why CLACSO's FOLEC Declaration of Principles on Research Assessment promotes the use of regional, national, and international indexing indicators for quality journals in regional research assessment systems. So some of the challenges are to promote plural, decentralized, and interlinked, for example, federated research information sources that are the way to move forward to ensure not only openness, but also diversity and inclusion, following a statement, a blog post that was recently published with the CWTS Leiden University Center and CLACSO FOLEC, among other initiatives. So please, next slide. We also have in the region a flourishing university-society interaction through what is called here critical extension. Extension because university extends into society and society comes over, extends into universities. So there are plenty of articulations regarding teaching, extension, and research in this long tradition interaction. Also, there are plenty of experiences regarding participatory social science tradition and a flourishing open science movement. Some of the obstacles are that research assessment performance reduces, or it is reduced to scientific publication. As I mentioned before, there is an increasing influence of publishing models outside Latin America that shift or model the criteria of national evaluation systems. So there is a bigger pressure for researchers to publish in international journal circuits, and they are being evaluated by those outputs. So in many countries, although there are heteronomous criteria, a culture of a strict accountability is the one that prevails. And there's also a lack of a standardized definition of societal engagement, and also a difficulty of quantifying those experiences. So the challenge following the UNESCO Outlook that was published in 2023 is to promote an assessment shift from quantitative indicators to the assessment of the process of doing science and the people who are engaging with or benefiting from science. So this should be followed by also a change in research culture. Please, next slide. Regarding early career researchers, we know that are one of the groups most vulnerable to the distortions in current evaluation systems. Also, the increasing graduation at doctoral level and the deficient creator of new job placements opportunity in academic work is resulting in greater job instability particularly in Latin America, political and economic instabilities in the region have amplified these issues by implementing funding cuts or restrictions in international mobility, among other factors. From FOLEC, I'm pointing into particular research evaluation instrument. We focus on the idea that different scales, variety of registers, linguistic diversity, and different audiences should be valued in research assessment. Also co-authorship and teamwork to promote the recognition of early career researchers, the recognition of co-direction of projects, to better recognize proposals over trajectories, situated academic stages for scholarship and access to research funding. We know that in the region, the age of graduation of post-doctoral studies or doctoral studies, it's older than in other regions. Also recognition of open access diamond journals on other components of open science, and particularly, and to summarize this, information systems that reflect a more comprehensive landscape of trajectories respecting diversity. So please, next slides. There are many synergies between FOLEC and FOARA, particularly promoting or incentivizing participatory and situated reforms aligned with open science and responsible assessment. The idea of creating or co-creating form of experiences and learning on research assessment, and to tackle a diversity of research assessment approaches in dialogue with existing science, technology, and innovation trajectories and instruments in our region. Last slide, please. So from FOLEC-LACSO, we think we agree that there is a growing momentum for reform towards broaden and more inclusive ways and means of assessing research. And we would like to collaborate with all of you in making these principles and guidelines more situated and more concrete actions in our systems. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lara, so much. Remember that we will have the open discussion after the 5 speakers, so please keep all your questions for that moment. And now we will move to our next speaker, which is Veronique Kiermer. Veronique Kiermer is the Chief Scientific Officer at PLOS, where she oversees the editorial department and the Department of Solutions to promote open science. Dr. Kiermer has a PhD in molecular biology from the Vrije University of Brussels in Belgium, and she was a postdoc in the laboratory of Dr. Eric Burdin at the Gladstone Institute in USA, after which she worked in biotechnology research and development for gene therapy projects in San Francisco Bay Area. She moved into publishing in 2004, first as a founding chief editor at Nature Methods, and then the executive editor for the Nature portfolio before joining PLOS in 2015. She's proud alumnus of the ORCID board, and she currently serves on the board of directors of the Keystone Symposia, the Scientific Advisory Board of the EMBL-EBI Literature Service and Biostudies, and the NISO Credit Standing Committee. Since 2021, he has been a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences Strategic Council for Research Excellence, Integrity, and Trust. Dr. Kiermer will enrich the debate by providing valuable insights from the publisher's point of view on research assessment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to, I'd like to share my perspective about sort of the interface of research assessment with open science and publishing. So I work for PLOS, which is a nonprofit organization with a mission to drive open science forward through changes in scholarly communication. So that means that all the content we publish is open access, but we're also using the publishing process to try to encourage different open science practices, such as sharing data, code, protocols, reviews, and so on. And we do that through policies, through solution to try to facilitate, through partnership with open infrastructures. And in doing so, we're trying to contribute to this open science knowledge pillar of the UNESCO recommendations for open science. And to measure our progress and how well we're doing in this mission, we've developed a series of open science indicators. We've done that with a technology partner, and basically it allows us to automatically look at a large body of published literature and look for open science practices. And here are two examples, sharing of open data in public repositories and sharing of code. And in green, you have the PLOS corpus, and the dotted line is a comparator sample. And as you can see there, while there is progress over time, from the time scale is 2018 to 2023, these percentages of articles that share these practices are still very slow, very low, and the progress over time is actually very slow. So you might argue that this is because we're not doing a good job, and that may be fair. I think that there is also another valid explanation, which is that trying to promote open science in the research community is really a systems problem, right? There are many things in the system that need to adjust in order for that to do. And publishing practices that encourage open science, they're only one part of the system. And where I see attention is around research assessment, because currently what is needed to make open science a reality are things that are not being recognized and rewarded in the research assessment system. It takes time to do science in an open way. It takes resources. And if you're an early career researcher, to advance your research, you actually need to publish many papers and publish them in some specific journals. And if you spend time and resources on trying to make your research more open, you actually are at a disadvantage. That's, I think, the reality that we are dealing with. And so that's why I care about research assessment, because without research assessment reform, I don't think that we can achieve our mission of promoting open science. And because there is this focus on counting publications and on traditional articles as being the unit of credit, I think that publishers are often seen as part of the problem. And there is truth in that, in the sense that publishers benefit from the pressures on researchers to publish a lot. But the argument I'd like to make is that publishers are also, because of where they are, potentially part of the solution. And that I think there should be pressures on publishers to actually evolve to support solutions. And in particular, I care about solutions for open science. And to explain what I mean by that, I want to go back to why we think open science is important, right? And so just briefly, open science can provide more reliable research because through openness and transparency, people can check and scrutinize each other's results and their claims. It promises to make research and produce knowledge faster and with more efficiency without waste, because people can reuse each other's tools and build upon each other's results. And importantly, as the UNESCO declaration really stresses, it's not only about accessing the research from others, but it's about increased participation by diverse groups of people. And if the research is more diverse, the point that Ismael made very well before, you can actually have research that is actually more trustworthy and that is more relevant to more groups of people. But open is not sufficient. Open enables all these things, but in itself, it's not sufficient. You also need effective processes of evaluation and correction. You need to be able to evaluate all that science in a way that is inclusive, that is free of conflict of interest, that is really effective at scale. open science enables collaboration. It doesn't drive collaboration. You need incentives for collaborations. You need an authorship culture that actually is inclusive of all the important contributions. And finally, access to participation needs to be true in practice. It's not, at the moment, there are a lot of people that are excluded from open access and open science because either their contributions is not considered important enough to be recognized through authorship, or because a lot of the open access publishing currently is based on gold open access, and researchers just cannot afford APCs. So what I would argue is that this right column is where publishers, if they are willing and if they are pushed to evolve in the right direction, can actually be part of the solution. And this is because this is where they have expertise, this is where they have experience of how things work. And finding solutions to that in the specific problem of open science, and I'm limiting here the change of research assessment reform to those changes about open science, but it can actually really help research assessment reform, because to the point that Brian was making, there is a very easy way at the moment, is counting. And so things need to be visible, things need to be able to be counted, and quality needs to be able to be evaluated. And all these open science contributions need to be visible and able to evaluate it. So I think that here are just 3 priorities that I would see for publishers that, if they're willing to evolve in the right direction, would actually help research assessment reform, is really making all of the contributions to open science visible, attributable to individuals, and being able also to develop quality assessment, organizing peer review in an inclusive and fair way, free of conflict of interest for these specific contributions to open science. And finally, making sure that all these new functionalities are open to all and accessible to all, and that will require new business models. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronique. And finally, we have Karen Stroobants. She also will join us virtually. We will wait to see you, Karen. Okay, can you listen to us, Karen? Yes?
Yes, I hear you. I turned the
Okay,
camera on,
great,
but I'm
great.
not sure you can
Great,
see me.
we now can see you. That's awesome. Okay, so I will introduce Karen then. So Dr. Karen Stroobants is a policy advisor and consultant on research policy and strategy with a specific focus on research culture. She combines a role as director of culture-based consulting and as lead policy advisor on research landscape and economy at the Royal Society of Chemistry. She was part of the team that drafted the agreement on reforming research assessment, ALLEA, and is the vice chair of the first steering board of the Coalition for Advising Research Assessment, CoARA. Previously, Karen held roles at RAND, Europe, and the Royal Society, where she led the development of the narrative resume for researchers that has been introduced in the UK and inspires similar efforts in other countries. Karen moved to the UK initially as a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellow at the University of Cambridge. Prior to this, she obtained her PhD in chemistry at the KU Leuven in Belgium. So now Dr. Stroobants will shed light on the CoARA initiative and its pivotal role in driving global reform on research assessment and an open research culture. So thank you, Karen, for joining us. And well, we will hear you.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Can you move to the slides, please? Yes, thanks. So my name's Karen, and I have been indeed invited to give a bit more of an overview of the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. So thanks for all the previous perspectives. They were a bit more provoking than what I have been asked to share. But I'll try to maybe respond throughout the presentation to some of those points. So if we move forward, I think the previous speakers already did an excellent job at pointing out some of the reasons why we're now actually at this kind of turning point in thinking about reforming research assessment. And these are all people before you who have thought about this for quite a long time. And it's actually also coming together of people who have realized, okay, there's these issues with the way that we assess that have come together at some point and turned this momentum into quite a big movement on reforming research assessment. And so the realization here at the kind of base, let's say, of CoARA was that assessment processes that are relying predominantly on journal and publication metrics are actually starting to be a hurdle to the recognition of diverse contributions and may even negatively affect the quality and impact of research, but also contribute to an unhealthy research culture. And so there's been several reasons that people have kind of brought to the table when they came together to start thinking about reform. The research culture that was maybe turning negative in some instances was one of them, but also some felt that assessment practices are no longer relevant. So they've been kind of outpaced by changes in the research system itself and in the research processes, and perhaps also are not always able to live up to the increasing demands that are placed on research by the many societal, environmental, democratic, and economic challenges that we face. And this actually goes back a bit to the previous speakers' points on the kind of things that are and aren't included and whether we are addressing those challenges adequately. So if we move to the next slide. So this was really kind of the basis for then setting out a shared direction for reforming research assessment. And so, of course, this is not the first time there's been an effort from people in the academic community to start thinking about this. And this work very much builds on DORA, on the Leiden Manifesto, the Hong Kong principles, and these are just to name a few other initiatives as well. But so the idea of the agreement was to build on these previous initiatives and set a common direction for research assessment reform, perhaps with the one difference that they wanted to build in a time frame so that those who said, okay, I sign this agreement would really commit to say, okay, I implement what is written in this agreement within a set time frame. And so the time points referred to in the agreement are to define a very clear action plan with milestones of how you're going to tackle this in the first year, and then a self-assessment against that action plan in year 5 as a starting point. And so I can't go in much detail on the agreement, but the one thing I did want to say about it was, if we go to the next slide, to just talk a bit more about what are these kind of core commitments that the agreement set out. So there are 4 core commitments and a range of supporting ones as well, but these core ones are really the center of the agreement. The first one is to recognize the diversity of contributions to and careers in research. I think this one was already actually quoted by one of the speakers. The second, to base research assessment primarily on qualitative evaluation, supported where it's reasonable to do so by responsible use of quantitative indicators. I do want to remark here that I don't think we should move to a system where we're going to count lots of other things. So we start to count how many open science publications, how many quotes shared. I think we want to go to something much more holistic than that, and not just expand the numbers that we use, but think creatively, as Ismael said, about other solutions. The third one, to abandon the inappropriate uses in research assessment of journal and publication-based metrics. And the fourth one, to avoid the use of rankings of research organizations in research assessment. And so these are kind of the 4 core commitments that anyone who signs the agreement says, okay, these are the things we will strive to move towards in the reform. And so all those who sign the agreement are able to join a coalition. And if we move to the next slide. So this is at the moment a representation of the kind of countries where there are signatories and members of the coalition. So the coalition, so CoARA stands for Coalition on Advancing Research Assessment, brings together these people who say, these organizations, I should say, who say, okay, we really want to commit to this and we want to do this together. It enables mutual learning. So it's really a learning community between all the organizations that are committed to advancing research assessments. And of course, the agreement does set shared principles so that everyone at least has this common direction to go in, of course, acknowledging that there will be diversification in the methods used, depending on disciplines, depending on geographical location and so on. As you can see from the map, the initiative is still very centered in Europe, but there is really ambitions to expand. Ismael already mentioned representation. There is a lot of thinking going behind, okay, whose voices are heard, whose voices should be heard in an ideal situation, how do we get from the first to the second situation? So there's definitely this ambition to have involvement at all levels of the coalition of all communities globally. And of course, that will take time. And as you can see in the US as well, there's not as many members yet as we'd hoped for. So we're hoping for increased engagement also in the US. And just to say on the next slide that there has been already some engagements, some events, and others will follow. And importantly, the success of CoARA will, of course, require collaboration of all stakeholders across the research landscape and across the geographies. Policymakers and funders have levers to ensure that national frameworks and regulations are supportive of the implementation of ARA commitments. That is sometimes a barrier. So that's the first kind of group who can help to really get there. And then, of course, research institutions are very well placed to enable these research culture changes that several speakers have talked about already across their own research communities, but also for those individual and maybe also early career researchers in the audience. Although individuals are unable to join CoARA by themselves, they, of course, all of us can be advocates for research assessment reform. We all have agency to challenge the status quo where there are questionable practices in place. And I think I would like to join Ismael in saying, you know, there will be, there are already working groups in CoARA, there are national chapters, but there will be more calls for contributions. And I do agree that we can definitely be even more innovative in thinking about what new methods to use in the future. So just to finalize on the next slide, I would say, I mean, you're of course already here in this event, so keep engaging. There's a few links on how to engage with CoARA on the slide, but also soon there will be a CoARA supporter badge available to show support also with the principles, the ideas behind CoARA. And I believe there's also a US listen and learn community in the make. I think on the next slide, there's some organizations who are involved in this who maybe those who are interested can reach out to. I don't know the details, others maybe in the event will do, but I did want to mention it because I think it's a great initiative to also increase the engagement of CoARA in the US. And I'll end there so that we have plenty of time for engagement and interaction with the audience.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the speakers. So now we will have about, I think, like 50 minutes of open discussion. You can all ask people in person, and also online attendees can also send their questions. So we will start. So I will start asking you, Brian, regarding research integrity, an aspect that that certainly plays a leading role in scientific evaluation. So as you say, so while for instance using impact factor to evaluate applicants is well known to most researchers, and you say it's simple, you can easily quantify through different indicators. Acknowledging research integrity lacks such precision. So I was wondering whether is there a consensus regarding both qualitative and quantitative indicators for assessing research integrity?
Thanks for that. And I think the easy answer is no.
Okay.
Research integrity is multifaceted first of all, as a concept. It is grounded in the actual practice of the everyday research for many of the things that we think about in terms of what integrity means. And it's principle-based, which often resists translation into quantitative indicators. That said, there are ways in which we can measure things that are multifaceted and principle-based and grounded in research. They just have to respect the fact that these things are more complex than a single value and needing complementary information between that which we can, for example, surveying one's colleagues. 360 performance reviews is a common thing in business cultures. We don't do that in the same way in research cultures. And not necessarily that the implementation is ideal, but there are ways in which we get information, we know information about who is good at their jobs in different ways. Lots of communities of practice come up with effective means of evaluation that aren't just counting on a CV. In medical contexts, some doctors are evaluated as better at their job rather than worse. I don't think they count how many patients died on the table for you. Let's use that as the indicator, right? They have other ways of evaluating. Lawyers, complex job. There's not a simple list on a CV of how good they are. So I think we just need to lean into the idea that it's a complex job. Let's represent that complexity with a multifaceted, what Ismael was raising, right? Diversify the numbers of indicators and validate those indicators that we have. None of them are going to be perfect indicators. So represent what is the responsible use. And I think that's a key message in the CoARA description, which is responsible use. It's not no use and all use. It's recognize the validity and use it in that way.
Thank you. Thank you. But then following with the concepts of research integrity, I would ask Veronique to join in the discussion and to comment on what strategies could be implemented to promote an authorship culture for integrity and transparency.
So I think that authorship culture is important. I mean, it goes back to publication, but basically that's what we have right now, right? So I see the importance of adapting the authorship culture for two reasons. One is because authorship needs to reflect how research is done currently. And it's done much more in terms of collaboration, team science, and so on, which isn't really necessarily well represented in our current authorship structures. And I think that also because publications are still at the center of now how people, if we actually adapt authorship culture, we can start transitioning towards modes of research assessment that look at more things. And so I personally think that authorship culture should be more inclusive in the sense that all the contributions that are important for the quality, the transparency, and the integrity of the work should deserve authorship. And I think that the way of thinking about that is thinking about authorship in two ways. I mean, very often we think about authorship as credit for the researchers, but there is a very important aspect, which is the accountability for the work. And so I think that you should be able to put a work forward where everybody is recognized that will be able to actually be accountable for the quality and the integrity of this work when it's questioned down the line. And so I think that involves including in the authorship lists and in the authorship culture, things like open science practices, right? Making your work transparent so that others can things like making sure that diversity is at the core of what, that patients are recruited in a way that is really, all of these things require effort. And these are the kinds of things that I think should be recognized through authorship.
Thank you, Veronique. So we'll continue
Luciana?
with a question for Ismael.
Luciana?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Oscar from the Mexican Young Academy, and I wanted to intervene because I want to address some of the things that they talked about. So recently with what Veronique said, I think that I completely agree that we need to change from the same system of publication that we have from 300 years ago that we haven't changed. We have PDFs and links now, but it's basically just patches. It's the same system. So taking from the open science community, the open access, the open source projects that we have from the computer science part, we can change the systems that we have for version control systems to actually implement this kind of research, authorship things, so that the whole scientific process can be tracked, and make it also so it's dynamic, because publications right now are just static. So yeah, I completely agree, and I think we should develop something like a version control system for scientific publication. And from the previous intervention from the expanding the number of I forgot the word, sorry, the metrics and all the different things that we can have different things that not just the papers and stuff. I think we should also say about something about how many it should be taken into account. But because, for example, in Mexico, they try to increase the number of things that you could contribute with in the research assessment part, but they made them all compulsory. So we need to say, yeah, you have all these options, but they should be options, not that you have to do everything. And that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before going on, Karen, who is online, she also raised her hand.
Yeah, I mean, just wanted to comment on the discussion, because I think this is a really interesting point. And I actually agree with the was it Oscar, the person who just came in? The whole point is about diversification, right? So we want to recognize people with different profiles who contribute different things, but that does indeed mean that not everyone should do everything, because I think there's different ways in which the research assessment system can evolve. And I'm now speaking very personally. My fear sometimes is that we're gonna create a massive tick box exercise where every type of contribution that you could have will have numbers against it. And for me, that's really the opposite direction of what I hope we will achieve. And I think Brian already kind of briefly touched on it, but I think we need to think a bit about what is it we want to get out of this, and what are the right ways to evaluate that. And yes, there are things where maybe on aggregate we can see, are we moving in the right direction with open science publications and open data sets if we look at, I don't know, all the universities in a country. But I think when we look at individual researchers, we will need more nuanced forms of evaluation, where sometimes we'll also need conversations. If we think specifically about integrity, I'm now thinking also about, I transitioned to another sector. I work in the policy sector. Some of the trickier subjects where it's more about behavior in my sector, they're tested through conversations, through talking through challenges, through thinking about challenging situations you've been in and how you have approached those, what you would do different next time. I have never in academia, in a job interview, had to say, okay, can you describe a difficult situation where there was an issue around research integrity that you had to solve, or where you had to take a decision that was difficult in light of the parish, or publish culture? How do you approach this? How do you guide students in this? Why not include questions like that in job interviews, or even in the funding allocation process at some point? I think there are ways where sometimes we are going to have to recognize a number cannot capture the complexity of certain elements of the job, and we'll need to think differently about how we approach it. And there are other sectors to look at how they do it. And as Brian said, they're not perfect, but there are definitely tools out there that we haven't explored that could be relevant to the academic context.
Please, Ismael, you wanted to join the debate.
Yeah, well, thanks for the various comments. So following on from your comment, which also Karen touched upon, researchers being asked to be jacks of all trades in the sense of doing everything. I wonder, and I put it on the table before as well, whether the fact that we are valuing different things in research means that we need to change the units of assessment, right? So if in a department in the Netherlands, researchers are assessed informally by the head of the department, and the head of the department can, or head of the lab can think, well, this guy, I want him, or I want her because she is a fantastic microscopist and takes care of the microscope of the lab. And she is wonderful at doing science communication. So if the assessment is not at the individual level, but at the lab or group level, then we can have a team dynamics. Now, the problem that we have in countries like Mexico or Spain, or well, in many countries in which there's national, rigid national research assessment systems, is that there is one single committee which needs to understand that this person is a microscopist and that person is a science communicator, and this is very difficult to assess at a distance. So I think, in a way, and I think this links actually to Brian's point about the joy of doing research. If we push back the assessment away from the individual researcher, we allow teams to have the joy of doing what researchers are good at within the team, and allow for creativity. So this might mean maybe less assessment. This might mean assessing more in terms of the missions and less about, you know, Platonic notions of quality. So I think that these frictions that we see when we are trying to implement CoARA with the traditional systems are telling us that we have to change not just the criteria, but the systems.
Following up on that, we assess opportunities to a large extent and we reward luck, which actually solidifies inequalities and privilege. So how do we move away from that and instead look at the qualities of research and of researchers?
Who wants to take it?
Can you say that again? That was like very specific. So these ideal qualities, in fact, bring specific perspectives of what is good science, and by assessing research with these ideal notions of quality, what we are doing is reifying, solidifying what has been good science actually in the past, not in the current research, right? How do we move away from that? If we have a system which is based on reviewers who are like ourselves of a certain age, we are going to reward the research that was good 20 years ago. So I think this aligns with the idea of trying to pluralize review panels, bringing in younger people, different career stages, and bringing in, and I think, so an idea for the Global Young Academy is to fight, and especially you that, you know, you're brilliant, so you have the credibility to do so, to fight for early career researchers to have a place in research assessment. And also for people outside of academia to be part of the panels. That might be another idea.
And I would add to do that in a way that affords them protection and security, because we are dealing with a lot of power dynamics. And I mean, but your idea of diversifying review panels and all that is exactly sort of the approach that I think we're trying in publishing, to bring in different perspectives, bring in more diversity, to actually really have different voices heard. And you see that there are power dynamics. We know that it's been studied. And so I think that this needs to be done. But so I agree that I think GOIA should fight for that, but should also fight for the proper systems and security mechanism around it.
Sorry, I lost the sound.
I cannot. Okay. So first, yes, Karen, go on.
I'll let Laura go first because I think she tried to comment.
Laura is also. I cannot see Laura's. So Laura, please. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
It's all right. Thank you, Karen. I agree with this idea that it should be changed from an individual to a departmental research assessment organization, particularly in Latin America, where research assessment is too much focused on individuals. But also I would like to make a focus on one of the topics of this session that was social interaction or socially responsible assessment. In that case, we think from FOLEC that clear signals that social interactions in many ways, in many modes, should be clear from research assessment systems. Nowadays, there are promotions of funding oriented research assessment to social problems, but then those processes and results are not, in all the cases, well evaluated by peer reviews or in sessions by peers in academy. And another thing is to change the criteria for evaluating social interaction to the process of social interaction, not only the result. There are many ways in which different sciences and social sciences also can contribute to auto-reflection of research systems, to process contesting issues in society that do not have an immediate result, that are a more medium or long-term result in societies, and particularly in our region, they are key to maintain democracy and to maintain the social interaction of all the society. So that point on evaluating better the process of interaction, we think that it should also be better considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So Karen, please go
Yes,
on.
thanks. I mean, I just wanted to make the point that we are now kind of pulling in a lot of different units or different things to assess at different levels. So I think we need to stay conscious of what we're assessing and for what reason. Because I do agree that it's important to also look at the team dimension. It's important to look at evaluating social impact, but the question is, at what level is that appropriate? There are certain things, I think, where we want to evaluate a whole body of research or research programs. There are points where we want to look at things at the departmental or group level or team level. And then there's things where we do need to evaluate an individual to hire them or to allocate funding if it's on an individual basis. So I think where there is this interaction with national systems, they should indeed look at the right unit. It's probably not appropriate to link that to the individual, because then we get everyone kind of the same profile. That's what we're trying to avoid. And then there, I think it's important to look at the team dynamic, but also for teams, departments, and institutions to say, okay, what is our mission? What are we trying to achieve? And what are the profiles that we need for that? And can we recruit on the basis of achieving that mission while also providing still some freedom for people to, of course, develop and follow their interests? Because I think that's an important aspect of academia that we don't want to lose in the process. At the level of individuals, my personal opinion is that we should also look more at competency. So not just at what people have produced in the past in terms of outputs, but just also kind of talk them through how they behave in specific situations, what experiences they have with things like people management or financial management, if that is part of their role. So I think there's quite a few things to think about at different levels. And I think we should always keep in mind what is the purpose of the assessment and what does that mean for the appropriateness of the evaluation methods that we use. And I do agree with Ismael that we probably evaluate too much. I think if researchers, if you look at all the points in their career and all the points in terms of every action that they take almost, that they are evaluated, we're probably doing too much. So I think less is more, so less but more qualitative and more thought through of why we're assessing, I think would be the direction to go.
Questions for from the audience?
Baruhi. I'm coming to you from American Institute of Physics Publishing, but I'm a former colleague of Veronique at PLOS. And I want to zoom out perhaps a little bit. I thought your framing, Veronique, of the complex system issue and Brian of the collective action problem is really powerful. You know, when I think of the universe of stakeholders who are engaging in this space, you have authors, you have institutions, you have publishers, funders, policymakers. They all seem to have shared goals, but I'm actually wondering to what extent the collective action problem is actually that these stakeholders do not share this same set of goals, and therefore we have this kind of glacial movement in behavioral change. So do you see those stakeholders, first of all, am I missing anyone? And second of all, are they as aligned in terms of these priorities as you might initially think?
I think that's a great question, and I certainly have no definitive answer on this, but perspective and experiencing discussions with all of these different stakeholders to date suggests it's easy to align on values conceptually. Very few people will argue against transparency in scholarship, for rigor in scholarship, for reproducibility in scholarship. Where the rub comes is in two ways. One is it's not about the value, it's about practice. You're just being Pollyanna to say that you can evaluate that because it's not possible to evaluate that. You're not recognizing the reality of how research has to get done, and it's messy and blah, 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 blah. So we can't actually implement these things in practice. That's where one real, true, but still approachable challenge is, yeah, let's work through the system challenges. Let's work through the implementation challenges to see what might work. The second is that where there's misalignment is where those stakeholder groups have other reward systems that are affecting them. The most prominent in the context of the current discussion is what are the pressures on institutions themselves? So leadership at different academic institutions care about what? They care about their financial bottom line. So are adopting these things going to undermine their ability to get grants to their institution? That's going to be a problem. They also care a lot about their ranking. What drives rankings of institutions? Well, a lot of the things that we would say, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't count. That's not the quality of science, but that's what the US News uses for US institutions. That's what all other metrics. Biden's trying to help expand how we think about metrics for evaluating institutions. And that's, I think, a very positive step for saying, look, people, as much as we might say rankings shouldn't matter, humans are going to attend to such things. And so how do we make them better and more responsibly used to the extent that they need to be used at all? And so those external agents that influence the stakeholder groups are the parts where you end up getting conflict, right? Publishers as a system have a different set of priorities for their bottom line that sometimes interfere with the adoption of these things. So that's my.
Thank you. Yeah, please go on.
Thanks. I'm Francesco Maurelli from GYA member. Now we have a couple of universities in Europe that actually withdrew from the rankings. Also high quality was University of Zurich and I think Utrecht in the Netherlands. Okay, and a few other universities, when you apply, they say, we don't want to have any H index in your curriculum, so remove any reference to that. So these are all signs that something is moving. At the same time, those universities still grade their students. So I'm thinking, we don't want to have numerical evaluation of the research, but we still want to give numerical values on how much students have learned from our classes. And that brings me to think maybe there is a shift also in the education, and we should also think about a more Montessorian way of education where there are no grades and people experience and learn. And it seems to be great in theory, but of course the implementation is not very easy, straightforward. So what do you think about that?
So who would like to take it? Ismael?
Well, in evaluation theory, there is a proposal that there are three purposes to evaluation. One is accountability, which is the counting, right? And for these, actually, you know, if for these, the indicators can be useful. Like how many publications tells you if there's been some activity at a certain university, but it's accountability. The other is distribution of resources. And for distributing resources, then the indicators are problematic. What's very important is the mission. Now, there is a third purpose to evaluation, which is learning. So, and when you submit a proposal and you get feedback, you get negative, your proposal is not granted, but you get feedback from the reviewers, you potentially learn, get new ideas of how you could improve the proposal, right? So in terms of, I think, of teaching, what you were saying is, of course, if you think of old times, when the relationship between teacher and disciple was more direct, they didn't need the grading. They could just give the feedback about what the student was getting right or wrong. So in this sense, another movement, which maybe is not so discussed in this high level of research reform, but we think that it's very important, particularly in transdisciplinary research, is evaluation as learning. And why is that important? Because in transdisciplinary programs, for example, transportation in cities, the research team which is working together maybe with the city council can learn a lot from the other stakeholders of how to improve the schemes. So, well, basically your question, I think, gave me the excuse to bring this idea of evaluation as learning, not as accountability or as distribution, which is mainly what we are thinking, but thinking of the possibilities of using these evaluation practices by giving feedback that helps the contents of the research to become better.
Just to add one small point to this, I would like to see more embrace of the idea of rating instead of ranking in institutional evaluation contexts. Your example of teaching, if you have a quiz and there's 10 points to earn, every student in the class can earn 10 points if they've prepared on the material appropriately. The point is not to figure out who is the best and who is the worst. It's to evaluate where are you against the targets of assessment. So if the rating system is valid, if it's aligned with the values that we have, if it's targeting things that the agent being evaluated can control, then it can be a very useful approach, particularly as the competition isn't with the others around you, it's with yourself. This rating system is what I'm trying to maximize my performance on. Is the same as I am as a student. Institutions could pursue the same.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is April Bernard. I'm a fellow with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and truly appreciate your presentation and pushing us to really think about more meso and macro metrics as we, try to change the world with open science. And I also appreciate your notions of diversity and participatory science and how important it is to open science. Building off of this notion of plural federated research that Laura spoke about, I would love to hear a little bit more about your vision What does that paradigm look like? The plural federated research.
So Laura, the question was directed to you. Did you have the chance to listen to it?
Could you repeat it? I didn't understand very well if it was focused on the federated open access in Latin America. Could you repeat the question?
Thank you. I just would like to know more about your vision for that model, or if there are any examples of the federated open science research.
Well, thank you very much for the question. The model is under construction. There is going nowadays a federation of open access initiatives in Latin America that are in dialogue with other international initiatives in Africa, in Europe, in Australia. And we are expecting and very anxious to move forward, but there is no one model. There are different models. We know that the open access diamond model in Latin America has a long tradition, but it's not the one which it's consolidated in Europe. So there are many dialogues in order to advance in joint actions, but clearly we have different points and different traditions regarding open access. We think that we should move forward and consolidate this alliance, but there are different perspectives on open access, and the idea of a federation, I recover the idea that it should be a federation in order to make more diverse and inclusive the scientific production and the knowledge production that we have in the region. But of course, we have there different infrastructures, open infrastructures to be combined and to move forward in this effort. So I wouldn't say there is one model. There are different models that are trying to be combined in order to strengthen open research information. Thank you.
Well, may I think maybe, Laura, we can put this discussion in the context of the Barcelona Declaration, which was a declaration made 3 weeks ago. CWTS, my institute, was one of the organizations putting forward that declaration, which is basically asking for research information, being metadata on publications, on open data sets or other research objects, for this data to be open for the sake of transparency, so that when a public organization makes an evaluation using this information, the process of assessment is transparent. Now, the implications of this declaration, to be clear, is that using the Web of Science, using a scope which is problematic because you don't have access to how that data was classified. And therefore, many universities, there is Sorbonne, Leiden, University of Barcelona, Milano, Utrecht, I think, or Groningen, the funding agencies of France and the Netherlands, what they are saying is we are going to support alternative research information sources which are open. And these include Open ALEX, but as well the research information systems which have been in place in Latin America for 25 years, such as Rovelli and CLO. But in order to assess, then we will need to combine the information from these different sources, because, for example, CLO is extremely good in public health in Latin America, Rovelli is very good in social sciences in Latin America, and depending on the context, we might need to combine the different sources. And that's the idea of federation of the different information sources that we've been discussing with Claxo, which is also one of the signers. I hope Laura is, if you want to add on. And
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the addition. Thank you. Laura, is there anything else you would
No,
like
I
to add?
think Ismael made clear the point that we are working on this combination of sources to make more open, more broadly inclusive and diverse the open research information that is available for research assessment in our region and internationally.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there any other question? Yeah, Martin.
The question via Slido, which comes from Sarah. How can we ensure that we don't lose early career researchers that do research in an open way and therefore don't fit in the old recognition system without the new one in place?
So,
Sure.
yeah,
Right.
Brian.
This is a great question because it illustrates the real challenge of the coordination problem, is that early actors take on more risk when the system hasn't changed to reinforce the things that those early actors are doing. There's a positive in this context. It's not a guarantee, but it is a positive, which is the values are already shared. So people do respect high rigor in research, and they can recognize high rigor. They respect open practices. They just don't see them as being as valued. They don't see others in their community doing them. But the fact that they are recognized as good practice provides an opportunity for even early actors, to the extent that the evaluation systems have some degree of flexibility, to be able to still shine in that system, even if they don't have the counts. Now, there are many contexts where they're rigid systems. You have to have X number of publications. You have to have them in an XYZ journal. Those are not flexible to such things. But other environments that have more open-ended, you need to be doing rigorous, they have code words, then there's still opportunity for even the early actors to be recognized as early actors on something that is valued to help to motivate the broader change.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that's also where, to the systems problem, where positive pressures coming. So for example, in the US, the OSTP memo that demands access to publication and access to data is creating a demand for those kinds of skills and expertise in a way. And I think that having that combined with the values that already exist, because as you say, people tend to agree with that, I think that that's where these different types of actors like funders and government organizations have a very important role to play in signaling the importance of these things, because all of a sudden, being someone who does things openly has a different value in that system if you know that funding is associated with this, for example.
Thank you so much. That's very interesting because we have one comment on.
Sorry, please. Before that, Karen, I think she also would like to add something, maybe in relationship with the topic. Please, Karen.
Thanks,
Sorry.
thank you. No worries. I mean, I think everything everyone else had said is true. You know, there is movement. We have some momentum now, and I think in some places there will already be differences in recognition. But at the same time, the hard truth is that in some places these people will not be recognized and will maybe not gain the position that perhaps they deserve because of the values they have and the way they do their research. So I do think that this transition period is not to be underestimated. And there are real challenges when these assessment systems are shifting with those people who are indeed early in their career and trying to balance perhaps aligning their practice with what they believe in and with their values and seeing that, you know, there is movement in that direction aligned with those values, while also keeping an eye on the fact that the system hasn't quite shifted yet and they might need to align with certain practices and norms that have been in place. So I think we need to first of all recognize that it's challenging and what we all in this room are doing is we're trying to create awareness. We're trying to really challenge people also on the research assessment practices they use themselves and they see around them, and also encourage them to question practices where they don't seem responsible and appropriate. And then I think it's also important to involve early career researchers as much as possible in the discussions on reform, so that we can at least keep track of what the real challenges are for those people, how they are being experienced, and whether there's any ways to mitigate them. So I think, you point out a very real issue. There are pockets where I think people are being recognized for having those values, and it's expanding. So I think that's really a hopeful thing to see. But equally, I think there are places where it will be very hard, and we need to try and mitigate as much as possible. I think, sorry, Laura also, I think, has her hand up just in case you don't see it.
Thank you, Karen. If I can speak, I think that there was a very good question in the chat. It's from Jerome Bosman. How can we have a global approach towards transitioning to responsible research assessment when the crucial contexts are most national? I think that is a very good question that we have debated a lot in Glaxo and FOLEC. And we think that we should take into account the heterogeneity and value of diversity in research ecosystems, while at the same time guaranteeing some homogeneity that allows access to funding, exchanges, and mobility of researchers, because we do not want to deepen the existent asymmetries that we have in scientific ecosystems. But we are doing a strong effort to identify and to value diversity as well.
A shout out in the Zoom about this new set of recommendations that are published by Dora and Lero on responsible use of indicators of research. I just had a quick look at it, and one of the issues that is raised in the executive summary is what Veronique was talking about, which is about the role of funders. And I was wondering, to what extent do you think, up until now, we're just thinking about, good research, good actors. I think there's also a responsibility in terms of assessment about what we do with bad actors and how do we assess those and how do we include those in our assessments. To what extent do you think that sort of connection between publishers, universities, funders, those high-level actors, to what extent do you think they should share data about these bad actors? Like when we talk about issues like paper mills, things like that, to what extent do you think there's scope for that kind of collaboration and exchange of information?
I think there is a need for a dialogue there that is not as developed as it should be. When you have issues, I mean, you're now talking about bad actors, about issues of research integrity or publication integrity. In my experience, it's very difficult to talk across sectors about this because the sectors are looking for different things. So if you think, for example, of a publisher and a research institution, the publisher who is faced with a case of potential misconduct is actually very interested in, are the conclusions correct? Is this piece of research valid, or should I retract it? That's my question as a publisher. The institution has a completely different set of questions, which is the individual guilty of fraud? What are the corrective actions that I need to take? Or what is the impact on my reputation, right? And so I think that those approaching these, and the funder will have still a different type of issues. And so I think with these questions at the moment, what we see a lot is that the different sectors are approaching things with different questions and different preoccupations about the thing. And so the dialogue to facilitate exchange of information in a way that is going to allow us to deal with this in a proper way without scapegoating people, without throwing people under the bus where they don't need to be, is actually very important. And we are really at the beginning of that. There isn't enough of it in my view.
I'll add a little to this, which is the bad actor element in the context of paper mills, predatory publishing, is a place where there's potential alignment among the stakeholders, particularly publishers, that doesn't have to address some of the other dysfunctions that are talked about in publisher business models affecting the system. And that's because those particular bad actor elements, the paper mills and predatory publishers, also are potentially damaging the bottom line for publishers by lowering the credibility of the journal and causing challenges just even operating publishing systems. And the common root is a shared root, which is the research culture. The reason paper mills and predatory journals exist is because they fill an economic need for authors. I can buy an article. I don't have to do the research. I can buy my name on this and fulfill the demands that my institution, my national government, whatever, are asking of me. Of course, there's also other types of motivations, but there is a shared challenge of the research culture that even what we might decry as non-functional business models or dysfunctional ones also can align on to try to address some of the broader culture challenges that would help everybody.
For a wonderful discussion. I have been thinking about what you guys were saying, and it seems like the way that this is going is towards more qualitative assessments, right? And the question is, we have qualitative assessments in the peer review process, and we're not satisfied with that at all. So the question, and we're especially not satisfied with that in terms of the fact that it seems that qualitative assessments really bolster discrimination or, go against this sort of diversity that we're trying to do by moving towards qualitative assessments. So I was wondering if you guys could comment on, sort of ways out of this catch-22. Yeah, thank you.
Well, qualitative assessment takes very different forms in different places. So I'm not sure if now we are talking about the journal level, we are talking about the department level. So this really depends at the level that you are looking.
Online
Well,
researchers cannot hear, sorry.
Assessment of the researcher rather than the research. Okay, well, here I see that, so peer, and then you're thinking about giving in terms of grants. Because
Jobs, grants.
Because, for example, I think that qualitative assessment of a researcher in a lab by the managers of the lab as a form of learning what you have been, learning what you have been doing and what has gone right or wrong, given that I think of you as, the key person with a microscope, or I think of you as the key person with science communication, and these things have gone right or wrong. This is a type of qualitative assessment that is fully meaningful and that can keep working. This is how it works in the Netherlands within in the ideal we would have of how it would work in a department in the Netherlands, right?
This is also very vulnerable to discrimination, right? Whoever you see as the key person might not be who's actually doing the best work. It might be biased.
Yes. This is so that there is a lot of leeway in there, and therefore we have to find out ways, if you want, of protecting the individual researcher. But yeah, so but I think that the point of the qualitative is this looking not at the quality, which you were falling into again, but looking at the qualities. What are the different tasks? What are the different competencies? What are different contributions? Rather than think about quality.
I'll just add there. I think it's a great issue to raise. I'm pro-qualitative assessment, but I'm really pro-valid assessment. And there is no singular assessment that's ever going to be the right singular assessment, and will never be done improving assessment. And so the real answer is not, here's the 5 things that we need to now do as assessment. It's let's build a science of assessment that's worthy of actually interrogating valuation practices, improving on those valuation practices, experimenting with new evaluation practices. There's a great science of assessment in education research, very mature, it's thought about this for a long time. So there's insights to draw on that we just need to start applying and then building a community of practice around actually studying it as a scholarly product. Thanks.
I think also the issue that you're raising is also the fact that you are always evaluated by your peers based on their own value and their own expertise. And the problem that Brian started us with all these different disciplines and all, and even within a discipline, when you're evaluating the work of somebody who is working on something slightly different, the expertise there is really difficult. And so I think that it's also about promoting and accepting in general different types of signals that we agree as a community to be good signals of values that have been respected, and also making all these assessments much more transparent so that I don't necessarily need to evaluate my colleagues' work if I know that peers have evaluated that work, peers who are going to reuse this work, who are going to really be involved with that. And so I think that transparency in assessment is also going to help mitigate to some extent. But I do agree that you are raising a very important point about not opening the door to more entrenching inequities than what we already have.
Thank you. We are almost on time. We have Karen that would like to add something about this. Please, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting discussion. And I mean, I agree with Ismael that I think we need to look more at qualities, and those are actually much easier to assess by someone without the exact technical expertise. It's more about the skills, the competencies. But I also just wanted to come in on this notion that we could maybe find some kind of, whether it's qualitative or quantitative assessment system that's bias-free or totally objective. I think we have to realize that that doesn't exist. Any type of assessment, whether quantitative or qualitative, will have bias and will have subjectivity. And actually, we did a study at the Royal Society of Chemistry on the publishing side showing that every step of the publishing process, and it was just focused on gender, had a gender bias. So there, and I'm sure if you would repeat that for other characteristics, you would find the same. So if you then draw metrics from that, those metrics are also intrinsically biased. So I think the safest thing to do is to say, okay, if we move to qualitative or even whatever option we choose, there is subjectivity, there is bias, and we need to think about ways to mitigate that as much as possible, but also recognize that it will always be there to some extent. And there are ways to do it, you know, thinking about certain trainings, but also thinking about who is on the panel, how many people are there, how do they challenge each other. So, you know, I think that is the right way forward to ensure that we are aware of subjectivity, are aware of biases, and think carefully about how to address them. And there, perhaps I can bring in Brian's point that we need to also do research on that and continue to look at that. And also agreeing with Brian, the reason that we are reforming research assessment is because research as a process has been evolving and assessment has not. And research will keep evolving. So that means research assessment will need to keep evolving. So there's not going to be, you know, a position in 5 years where we say, okay, this now is the evaluation system forever. It will be something that keeps evolving, and we'll need to keep having these conversations as the research process evolves by itself as well.
Thank you, Karen. And I think it will be last intervention, Ismael.
Well, I just would like to come back to Brian's initial point, which was, you know, we are not doing research for having an age index. We are not doing research for having published this many papers in impact factor above 10. So when we come back to qualities, is actually what have you contributed to knowledge? Have you set up a fantastic microscope? Have you explained, you know, the wonders of the galaxies to children. These type of knowledge contributions, these are about qualities. And this is, in the end, the question is, what do we want science for? And depending on how you answer this, so to explain the wonders of the world to children, you know, to set up a microscope that is going to be useful for semiconductors, you're going to assess different qualities. But I would go back to these initial words by Brian, so, you know, recovering in assessment, the joy of recovering in science, the joy of contributing to knowledge for some purpose.
Okay, thank you so much. I have to be honest, I have prepared some words for closing, but I prefer to let the discussion go on because it was great. Thank you, all of you. I trust this session has stimulated ideas for reforming research practices, fostering a more open and socially responsive research culture, and most importantly, providing actionable steps to really enact change. Many thanks to all of you, and especially to the speakers for sharing your time and your valuable insights with us. Thank you.